So welcome, everybody. I'm really just delighted to introduce you to our panelists today who are going to talk about, how to build a solutions culture in your newsroom. There's four folks. Unfortunately, Vicky Camarillo was unable to make it today, but we have Tom Huang from the Dallas Morning News. I'm looking around, we got Kate Stockrahm from Flint Beat, Brittany Schock from Richland Source, and Nate Schoenfelder from Montana Free Press. They are all leaders in their newsrooms and leaders in solutions journalism in their newsrooms, and have really been instrumental in working and broadening and deepening the solutions journalism that their news organizations are doing. So please help me give a warm welcome to the four of them. And they're here today really to, the way we structure this, to answer your questions. And really through that, we'll, I'm sure share what they've done, how they've done it, and what they've learned from it. But we're going to structure it around the great questions that you all sent in, which was just really a wonderful, robust, and interesting set of questions. They sort of, we've taken them all and grouped them into different themes, and really three primary themes bubbled up from what you all asked. First and foremost, I guess we'll use the shorthand word workflow, how to do solutions journalism with your regular work, what do you need to do differently maybe in your workflow to make your solutions coverage more robust, et cetera, et cetera. So here's how it's going to work. We're going to spend about the first half of this session with our panelists answering your questions, and I'll be posing them to them. And we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Some of them are very similar, so I'm hoping we can get through many of them on those three themes at least. Then we're going to go into breakouts where you'll be with one of the panelists, and we'll have a chance to talk about a specific question or challenge you're facing with solutions journalism in your newsroom right now, and get input from our guests, and also from the other folks in the room, because a lot of people here have experience, a lot of experience with solutions journalism as well. So we'll be in those rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back out to wrap up. And we'll also be sharing some mini case studies we've done on each of these newsrooms. And we'll do that at the end as well. So any questions before we start, or any thoughts before we start? All right. Well, welcome again. Panelists, I think you should just jump in. I'm going to ask the questions, and you should just jump in and answer the ones that you would like to answer, and more than one person can answer each of these questions. So please chime in early and often. And again, I think we'll start with workflow. And start with the question about what were the most effective strategies for teaching SOJO in your newsroom and making it stick, which was sort of related to the question about how to keep solutions top of mind in your newsroom and with your reporters. Does someone want to see?
I can start with our strategy in Dallas, and then maybe talk about some other newsroom strategies. But kind of big picture, we decided to start with some centers within our newsroom to be early adopters of SOJO over the last few years. And so Education Lab, which is our community-funded education team, which has long been a leader in solutions journalism. Our Arts Access Initiative, which is a grant-funded program with a partnership with the public radio station, and then Science and Health. And so we weren't trying to incorporate SOJO across everyone in the newsroom, but we wanted to start with these centers and see what they could produce and show to the rest of the newsroom. I know other newsrooms have tried different things that have been successful. The Arizona Daily Star, they have a reporter who's dedicated to SOJO, which seems to be working. In Corpus Christi, they've actually incorporated it into their onboarding. program and their performance evaluations, which we don't do, but it seems to be helping there.
Thanks, Tom. Brittany, Kate, Nate?
I can go next. So effective strategies for teaching Sojo in your newsroom and making it stick and keeping it top of mind. At Richland Source, one thing I think that benefits us is the knowledge that this is like a top-down, bottom-up. We've adopted solutions as a strategy. Everyone in the company knows that this is who we're about. So for new people who come in, it's really easy to say we have a solutions culture. This is going to be a priority. And to know that you're going to be backed up no matter who you talk to in the company. People know that we are a solutions newsroom. I think for us, it's about consistency and setting expectations. So again, setting that expectation right up front that you're going to be trained in this, you're going to, we will expect you to produce solutions content regularly, and then be consistent about that, consistent about talking about it. We do track bylines in our newsroom. So I do keep track of how many not only, how many solutions bylines, but just how many bylines are you producing in a month's time. And so if I notice like, hey, you haven't written a solution story in a while, I might have a conversation with a reporter, like, can we maybe brainstorm something together? We also get feedback from peers. Every once in a while we have, I call it the solutions grand jury, where I send out a solution story to the rest of the staff and everyone reads it and gives feedback. And I ask them to identify the 4 pillars. So it's really like a teach all, learn all environment. That doesn't work for every story, but I have gotten good feedback from the staff when we do have that. So, but I do think it's about just talking about it all the time, keeping it top of mind, just reiterating over and over again, this is an expectation. You have to be consistent with that message.
Yeah, I actually kind of want to double down on that. I think for us at Montana Free Press, the most success we had seen in making a solutions culture in our newsroom, it started with our editor. Originally, when we were doing solution stories, they were kind of these one-off projects. But as we were going forward, we were finding that in order to create that culture, make it stick, it started with the editor, bringing up these ideas like, hey, here's a story pitch from a reporter. Okay, that's great. Is there a solutions angle to this? And eventually, like asking that question, having conversations about that in editorial meetings, eventually started to build that culture to where now we have reporters who will be like, I want to take a solutions angle on this. And then we'll talk about, okay, well, what's out there? Is this something we could do? And I think also understanding that solution stories, while they can take more time and are a lot more involved, they can be done at a smaller scale. In like, we're a statewide newsroom, but there are stories, where we have had freelancers who are covering local issues, write solution stories for us. And just by letting them know, this is something that you can do. And while there's a little bit more work involved, you don't have to create some sort of enterprise reporting piece for it to be a solution story. I think has really helped our reporters understand that there are opportunities to do Sojo work in their day-to-day.
And can I round it out, Linda? Is that okay? Because just say we're a small newsroom. We're around like 5 or 6 folks. And so if there's anyone on the call who wants to know sort of how that works, it actually was an introduction to our team writ large, where we said, hey, like this is something we want to prioritize and who wants to be on board first. And that actually got sort of the people who were going to be the early adopters and excited about it, trained up and involved from the jump. And then they became the ambassadors for others, and people saw the work and how that was received. And it sort of helped build on itself in that way. And then once people self-select, then you can sort of start up that approach and talking about those as Nate did with editorial meetings, and how we could change the lens and what we can do from there. So I think that really helped us, because I do think, as you might know, it's very daunting to sort of take on this huge thing that is solution journalism. And until you see that it can really work and function, especially as a newer reporter or a younger reporter or new to a newsroom that's just implementing this for the first time, being allowed to like make that decision for yourself first helped us sort of figure out the best ways and strategies to train those folks up and then have them be the ambassadors on our behalf.
Great, thanks, Kate. The second question is really sort of related and actually might flow through, and Kate, you might want to take this one up first. And that's, what changes helped your newsroom create a system that allowed for the regular practice of solutions journalism? And a related question, what was the most difficult part of that and how did you solve it?
Yeah, this is gonna hurt, but what happens is you actually have to change your process. You have to set realistic goals, especially again, size and scale of your newsroom or the team that you're working with when you're implementing this will matter. But we really slowed down. We decided what stories we needed to prioritize, what size stories, what scale stories really made sense so that we could make space for this. And then literally our founder and publisher would come in and say no to things that seemed like they would take away from that. It was very hard to do sometimes. It meant maybe we're not the 14th newsroom at this, meeting or something like that. It was easy to sort of cut out some of those, but then there were some tough decisions and there will be tough decisions along the way to make those priorities happen. But it's about having, again, like that one person or two people who are really committed to making sure that those processes stay in place, even when, the going gets tough and you're like, oh, I want to go back to my old habits and just cover the daily grind.
And I know others of you will want to weigh in on that one as well.
I'll just add that the ongoing turnover in local newsrooms, which has nothing to do with solutions journalism, has been a challenge. So, Sarah Gustavus Lim, who's in the call, and one of her dear colleagues came to Dallas, I think in 2018, to do training. And so we started on that journey, but then the pandemic hit. And I'd say our turnover probably over that time has been close to 40% in our local newsroom. And I'm sure that's reflected in other local newsrooms as well. And so when you have that kind of change of people, it's hard to have that continuity of people who are trained, people who are committed. And so, that's something that we've had to figure out. I don't have a answer to that, but would love to hear from others about how they've handled that.
I totally agree with feeling like you have to constantly be training people to do solutions journalism. We're going through the same thing. We're going to have 3 new people this summer that are brand new. And so I have to go through this all over again, but that's okay. I would also hard agree with thinking about what can you stop doing if you've decided that you want to commit to doing this. And then also kind of having an ambassador for solutions journalism. The stop doing, I mean, that's really like, it makes sense. You can't do more with less, and so this is something that you have to lean into, and it is hard. I mean, I would say that we have not yet successfully done it. If I'm being honest. So do as I say, not as I do. But I will say that having, my position as the engagement and solutions editor, like having me in this position to constantly advocate for solutions journalism and be like, again, the ambassador for it. You don't have to necessarily create a position like this in your newsrooms, but to have someone own it and say like solutions journalism is going to be our response or my responsibility. And so you have that one person who's going to be advocating for it and keeping it top of mind. I think that's really a really important change to have, because otherwise it is going to get swept up in just, the daily grind.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for me. For our newsroom, I think the biggest challenge was just kind of getting the culture established, like having the conversations in open discussions. Again, like I mentioned, I think there was just a mindset of that the work is for solutions journalism is really, really daunting, and that our reporters really bristled at the idea of being asked to do a whole lot of extra work and like adhere to some very specific things on how the reporting would be done following these 4 pillars. But I think more and more as they realize, that the stories that they wanted to cover lent themselves to solutions journalism, and once they got familiar with it, I think it was easier to have it as part of a regular conversation.
Great. I'm going to risk asking one more question in workflow before moving on to kind of staff buy-in and staff training, because there are a lot of questions around that as well. But I think it might be important to answer this question, because I think you're going to hear a range of what was your typical turnaround time for solutions journalism stories?
I think to Nate's point, one struggle has been to understand how solutions journalism can be incorporated in daily stories and faster stories. So we tended to do longer stories that might take a week or two, or even project level stories. And I think probably that's how most newsrooms start. So the challenge is, how do you get that mindset for daily stories? And so, we might have had some stories that took 2 or 3 days, but typically it's been longer than that.
I think for us, it's about like the reason why repetition and doing it over and over again and having it top of mind all the time is important, is because it's about a mindset. Once you have a solutions mindset, it becomes so much easier to find stories, because you know what you're looking for and you're already thinking about solutions. I've had reporters who go to ribbon cuttings for a dentist's office and find a solution story there because they're thinking about it. And that's hard to do. It takes some getting used to be constantly thinking about, where can I find a solutions angle? So that takes, it takes some time. It takes practice to constantly be doing that, because otherwise, like Nate said, it is a struggle. It's a struggle to be like, oh God, I have to do this story. What am I going to do? And to brainstorm what the idea might be and to do all the research. It's so much easier to find it within beats you're already doing, because half of the work is done. You already know the research, you already know the background, you already know your sources. For us, you talked about turnaround time. We've really tried to adopt the mindset of like, it's a practice, not a project. So this is something that you practice every day. There have been project-based stories that take months to do. But I also really for a while was trying to push short turnaround stories, like less than 1,000 words. How can you do this in a day or 2 days? And again, I think it's just about repetition and practicing that, because, if you want to do it regularly, you have to discipline yourself to look for things and to keep doing that.
Yeah, I would say as far as turnaround time goes for us, it tends to vary based on what the beat is and how familiar the reporter is with the solutions reporting. I would say on average, probably a week, maybe 2. A lot of the discussion we'll have at times is whether we want to do sort of a brief. If we acknowledge like, hey, there's something that we can take a solutions angle on, but we need to get something out immediately. Understand it's like, okay, well, we're gonna publish a brief today, and then we're going to continue to follow up on that. And if there is Sojo reporting that we want to do with that, we will have that in there. And it's actually worked pretty well from an audience engagement perspective. I think sometimes I've had reporters worry this like, oh, well, is this really worth taking like 2 bites at the same apple kind of thing? And the answer is that it is worth it, because one is there's a timeliness aspect to the news that you cover, but then there is the solutions aspect of it, to where people can have more understanding of the issue, get into the complexities of it. And so I think acknowledging that while things will take time, it's not an either or sort of thing.
Do you want me to go, Linda, or do you want to to that?
Go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
As a smaller newsroom that's like building out this branch of our work, we have a fortunate position of people not necessarily yet expecting this of us every day or every week. So we've really taken an approach of the story takes as long as it needs to take to be the thing it needs to be. Because we are learning together, we are growing together. I think that's a helpful approach for us for now. But we would also very much like to get to a place where it's a practice, not a project. But we've gone anywhere from a week to, I'd say, even a month or two on some of these as we're trying to build out that practice and trying to make sure we're asking the right questions.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I know you all have experimented with doing both longer and shorter stories, shorter solution stories. And Melissa in a minute is going to drop in a resource for all of you about some tips for how to do the shorter ones as well. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next topic, in which has to do with how to motivate and train staff to do solutions journalism. And all those questions seem to really coalesce around two themes. And some of you touched on this already, like, how do you interest folks in doing solutions journalism and support them doing solutions journalism, especially when, maybe they've been a journalist for a long time and have never attempted something like that before.
It's interesting because what I've seen is that I think especially among new career journalists, there's already the interest, because I think actually many of them have some solutions journalism component in their college journalism work, which is really fantastic, I think. So, but I think the challenge is more around the middle layer of editors. So I think if you can find a way to get one or two of those editors on board, then I think the floodgates will open. The problem is that the middle layer of editors are so busy and they're juggling 20 things and under a lot of pressure. So, but you need to find a way to help them see that there is an advantage to including some Sojo stories in the mix.
I would echo that at 100%. I think we have a relatively younger reporting staff, and so they're pretty open and flexible. But I do think editor buy-in is probably the biggest way, just because of the fact that it's going to influence so much of what's getting reported, setting priorities and things like that. So that's where I would start.
As one of those middle editors, I guess what I would offer to the buy-in that makes it easy is even just having some components of a solution story be part of that questioning along the way that your reporters are doing, and showing them how simple but how much more effectively they report because they ask some of these questions, even if it doesn't end up being a solution story, has been wildly helpful and so interesting to see, right? Instead of just asking, oh, hey, like, what does this mean for the kids? It's like, what could be done better for the kids, right? And that simple change makes a teacher tell you about a new thing that they're researching, gives that administrator time to think and consider, oh, you know what, we've actually just been researching this over here in the city. And so we can use that, even if it's not that story, to move it and pitch something else the next week or along down the line to follow up on that particular piece of information that just sort of is maybe a little nugget in that first story. And that's been really helpful because it also means story generation's easier, pitch generation's easier, all of these other things that kind of fall on your middle tier editor sometimes become part of the process anyway, even if we're not calling it Sojo at that moment.
I would agree with that, especially the questions that you're asking. Something that I have found is between giving someone a training on solutions journalism and them actually producing it, sometimes there's a middle part that's missing when it comes to support from your editors, or from especially if you have an outside person coming in and doing the training and then they leave, and then it's like, well, how do I actually do it? There's this part in the middle that's literally tangibly, how do I do this? And so I have found that it helps to brainstorm what questions that you want to ask, and how are these questions going to help you get to the 4 pillars, and really mapping out a story has been incredibly helpful, because taking that extra step makes it seem less scary, kind of demystifies it, and it makes it seem like, oh wait, I can actually do this. I don't need to, like, I know, like, this is so easy to get to the 4 pillars. And then also for us, we've been able to tie revenue in with solutions journalism, which makes it really easy to have buy-in, like from, the top down. So I know that's a separate topic, but anyone can ask me anytime about revenue and solutions journalism.
You might get a lot of calls, Brittany, from making that statement. Yeah. I was gonna just harken back to one thing I forgot earlier, Kate. You guys experienced a little fear in your newsroom when you talked about slowing down to spend a little bit more time on solution stories because they are enterprise stories, and we're a little worried about what that would do to readership on your site. And what you learned is that it didn't have the effect that you thought. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be honest, it was me. I was the one who was like very scared that people kind of came to us at certain times of the day. We're a small newsroom, but we have a publication schedule that people relied on. And as we had to sort of thin that out a little bit to make space for this, I was very nervous that people would stop coming to us as a resource. But we ended up finding, and I'm so sorry, it's very loud outside. What we ended up finding is that even in the weeks that we published less, but we published a solution story, we actually saw more engagement. And that was really brilliant because it also showed that like it's worth putting in that effort, it's worth putting in that work, because you will still see the same dividends, if not greater dividends, simply by spending that time, because then your readers are also spending that time with you.
Great. And Nate, I thought you might want to add a little bit there, because you also had some promising data around, solutions interest to new audience members, right?
Actually, one thing that we had seen, and this is something that we had heard about. I mean, when we would be out, like whether it's tabling or having community conversations with people, often we would hear about people's interests in solutions journalism, even if they weren't calling it that. The things that they were expressing were the sorts of things that you hear a lot about the benefits of solutions journalism, where it's less about, bad news sells kind of thing. I want to hear what people are doing. And we had seen that when we were publishing solution stories in specific local communities, that the ability for us to grow new readership was much, much better than local stories that were focused in those same communities, but were not solutions related. And so solutions journalism really has helped grow the top of our funnel, especially when it comes to local news.
Great, thank you. Time is flying here, as I thought it would. So I'm going to ask one last quick question on sort of the third theme that a lot of your all questions focused around, and then we're going to move to the breakouts. And it sort of touches on what you guys have been discussing in indirectly as well, which is, when you're working with other folks in your newsroom in producing solution stories, whether you're an editor or you're a fellow reporter, what's most important to talk to them about, and making sure it's a solution story. How do you have conversations about solution stories that are different maybe from having conversations about other stories? How do you decide and talk about solutions work in your newsroom?
For me, I always go back to the 4 pillars. I really use that as a touch point to whether something's going to be a solution story or not. I know that it doesn't necessarily always need to be that rigid, but for me, it helps very much to be able to go back to that and say, like, you need these parts of your story. Here's how you can ask these questions. And I also really emphasize with my reporters that a solution story doesn't mean you're necessarily finding a solution. It's about reporting on a response to a problem. And sometimes the solution didn't work, but you still have to report on a response to it. And so I think sometimes my reporters get caught up in like, well, they tried this and then it didn't work. I'm like, that's okay. It's still a solution story. There's still things to be learned from that. So I think that that's been a really big thing for me to emphasize, is that it's a response to a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean a solution. And in some ways, the name's almost a little bit misleading sometimes.
I think it's
Yes,
also
indeed.
helpful to use those pillars to pick that out for them in stories that maybe weren't presented as solution stories, but then you can sort of pick apart and show them like how close they are to the thing that they're being asked to do. Because like, it's very rare that you're not like presenting a problem in a story, right? That's why we're writing about it in the first place. It's very rare that you're not giving some insight, right, into what that problem looks like or feels like for the people involved. And so like, as much as it does feel like a little like roadmappy and maybe like too rigid, sometimes it really does show how quickly and easily you can turn something into that if you just did this one extra step, right? If you just spent that extra day, that little bit of time. And then of course, yeah, still make space for it. But I agree fully with Brittany in terms of just like you really must kind of keep to that roadmap and then help folks find it in everything they're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to all of you very, very much, and for staying a little bit over. Please help me give big thanks to all of our panelists today. Thank you very much for being here.